Thanks so much for being here, Henri and Keith. It's such a pleasure. I always really enjoy your company, virtual, and Keith, we've met in person in Denmark a few years ago in Chaos Pilots, and you are the guys who literally wrote the books on liberating structures. So it's such an honor to have you here with us today.
I have a copy also.
Yeah, and it has your name on it too. Don't lose it. Welcome so much. And Dorothy is gonna do a celebrity interview with two of our biggest stars, Henri and Keith. Maybe the rest of us can turn off our videos so we can focus on this.
Fun. Okay. I'm excited. So I'm just going to get right to it. My first question today is, how did Liberating Structures start? Is there an origin story? How did this work come about?
Oh my. Henri, do you want to start? I usually have a story that I tell, but I think Henri has one that's worthy.
I'm wondering whether the story is the same. Is it, because the thing I'm thinking about is that meeting in Ohio with all those army people, which was the first time you and
They were healthcare people. Yeah, we met there.
Well, this is. I mean,
so it was.
If you want an origin story, it is really, in a way, that story is how Keith and I, connected. I mean, we knew each other. We had met before, but that particular occasion was when the two of us sort of developed some bond that we could not predict what it would turn into, but we had a really good time together. We enjoyed doing something together. So you can tell the story, Keith, if you want. Your story is what? Your origin story is what? This was something that Keith was running. It was a workshop that he was running for a large group of people that were working for the healthcare organization that is catering to soldiers and veterans in the US. It's called the Veterans Administration Group. And I just got accidentally invited to be there.
There's nothing accidental. You just formed an institute to explore practical applications of complexity science. So Dorothy,
So what's your origin story?
Well, it's there, but let me get to it. We love the beginning. Our relationship is about a little bit of bickering. Get the story right, Keith, is what he's thinking. But we were doing early on. We wanted to find people who wanted to do the work. Who were interested enough to do the work. So there was a leader of the one region of the Veterans Health Administration. And he saw it. It was about relationship. It was about whatever. So we were invited to do field work all over Ohio, which is the middle of the United States. It's where this election is the election we're having today, presidential election is happening really. It's the heartland. So Henri and I are there. And in addition to complexity science being the origin, strong interest in making this mind-bending new science practical was, could we make it real? Could we liberate in the midst of a hierarchical military health, or if you think about healthcare, it's hierarchical, doctors are at the very top. You talk about the military, there's a clear hierarchy. And within the context of that, could we liberate? Could we include every voice in shaping what happens next? And so both of us were like, from the beginning, fascinated. Can you do that work? Are they gonna accept our invitation? Right? Because you've got to structure it. You control things. You're leading. And so both of us, Henri was a seasoned corporate, just finished a long career. And I don't know what I was, but we're like, okay, is this a setting in which we truly can unleash, invite every voice and unleash every voice? And they're going to shape a new way to move forward to something they really value. In this case, what they really valued was honoring the service of the, it wasn't just Army, it was all the services. And so we're in the middle of this thing, and we meet each other and we're like, oh my God, this is fun. The field work, if you use liberating structures, you find it endlessly fascinating to do the work in the field. And yeah, how can we liberate? So we're liberating away. And in addition to seeing that kind of liberation at that level, Henri decides that he wants to talk about how to end all wars in the middle of this Veterans Health Administration. So I always say I saved his life because we were, if you know open space, Dorothy, I'm not sure whether you use open space very much, but one of the topics that he wanted to get up, and he does have an accent, so he's in the middle of the United States. He wanted to get up and sound like a Frenchman and talk about the end of wars, which is worthy. I wanted him to do it, but I also wanted him to live past the end of the workshop because this was a place where that may not have been a popular topic. So that's my little twist on the origin story. Mm-hmm. Henri, how did I do?
Yeah, well, it was I think that it was a good example of being surprised by the response of the participants, and therefore being encouraged to do more and to go forward. And I think the other striking experience that we had, which to me was also an origin story, was that workshop that we did in Brazil, which was the first really liberating structure workshop, where we had a group of people from one organization from top to bottom for 2.5 or 3 days. And we ran through, I don't even remember how many liberating structures. And it was absolutely unbelievable what happened with that group. How within a half a day, the dynamics totally changed, and the relationship between the people at the top and the people at the bottom of the organization was transformed. And the reaction of the people and how they felt about that gathering, that they had never experienced anything like that, and how vocal they were, made us kind of sort of stand back and say, wow, maybe we have something that is bigger than what we thought we had. We didn't, I think it was sort of like it forced us to pay attention to what we were doing in a different way. At least for me, it was that kind of a thing. And then we had some repeat of that. And so it turned out to, the first one is an accident, the second one is a coincidence, the third one starts being a pattern, and sort of feel like, well. And then people start pushing on us and say, you have to document this, you have to write it up, you have to have documents for this, and you have to have things that we can follow. So this is how I think we got kind of kicked into doing it. It was not planned, I can assure you.
Very much in liberating structure spirit, I would say. How many years ago was this?
It was 2004, I think. No.
The Veterans Health was 2003 or 2002, and then 2004, I think.
It was 2004. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right in there. Yeah.
So it's been then about 16, 17 years in the making since then, and I'm curious if how you would describe the purpose of liberating structures has evolved since then.
transform the world, is that enough, or you want something bigger?
Maybe more specific. I assume the more specific one would have evolved a bit more, or maybe not.
It showed the hints of how it was going to evolve happened immediately, right? So we're in Brazil. I'll tell this little bit of the story. We're in Brazil and we hang around for another week or multiple days to do one-on-one coaching interviews, like whatever you want, come in, talk to us for an hour. Anyone in the workshop, and there were 80 people in the workshop, 8 or 9 levels of an organization of, international organization. And so people came in, and the hints of what it has become were right there. And so the first person, the second person, third person, they didn't come in with a business issue. We thought, of course, you're going to want to talk about the, making the thing efficient or effective, or how are you going to measure things, or something like that. But no, it was like my relationship with my spouse, my kids, the school, the faith, my faith. How can I apply this to, and certain things were projected onto us. Like, you guys are obviously onto me, maybe more than Henry, but you're a therapist. Of course you're a psychologist or a therapist. And we're like, no, we're a couple of business guys. And so that the degree to which the work was universalized to all kinds of relationships in all domains, in all over the world, was instantly like, that was part of the surprise. Is once you've liberated this thing, this pattern, let's call it a pattern of interrelating, or once you kind of get wind of that, you don't stop. You start applying it to everything. And so I think when we started, the purpose was the effect, let's include and unleash everybody in making organizations more effective, more inclusive, that kind of thing. But it's really like, let's create a pattern for everyone and all. That's why Henry says, can we change the world? Because it got way bigger, even from the beginning, but we didn't notice what that meant. The first experiences with people asking about their lives, not their business, should have clued us in, but we were slow to notice it.
And that was a surprise for us. I think we were surprised to discover in the process of people submitting challenges that they were facing of one kind or the other. We were surprised to discover that there was not a single instance or a single thing that people came forward with where they could not find, together with us, some way of using some of the liberating structure in order to help them move forward and make progress. And so this is in doing this that we kind of realized that those structures, either separately or together, or pieces of the structure, could be used for just about anything. Like how you think, how you interact, how you have a conversation with another person, how you do things in your family, how you get work done, how you solve problems, how you handle big projects. So it kind of kept growing, not because we intended it that way initially, but because we discovered that this was possible because of what people were doing. So most of the work is not done by us. It's done by people who are using the structure, and in the process showing to us that they can be used for this and for that. I remember our first friend who started using liberating structure for restorative justice. A lawyer is going to use liberating structure. Well, yes, he did, and he's been doing it for I don't know how many years now. So that's been our experience. And so when people ask us what is it good for, and we say for everything, it's sort of like, this is crazy, right? Nothing is good for everything. But that's what kind of has happened.
And Dorothy, I want to say it's universal also that we don't assume that people will notice that as they begin. You should be cynical about every approach to change, most of, to adapting. We don't think any less of anyone who doesn't think that it'll work. Actually, I think it's great. If you don't think it works, that's a good beginning.
This is actually a perfect segue into the next question I have in mind, which is, what are some of the common obstacles people run into when they're trying to just bring LS into an organization? I definitely have this experience that they feel like a living thing that's spread on their own once they're in. But maybe do you have maybe a specific story of a certain time when you faced a lot of resistance in introducing LS into an organization? And how did that go?
Fear. Insecurity, fear is the first, and habits.
Well, we're basically saying you can gain from messiness, right? Everything else you gain from orderliness. And we're saying stir it up, every voice, every place, and that you're going to gain from that. Well, you've got to prove it every time. So I'm not sure. I'm going to tell a success story and then maybe one that didn't work so well. But I remember clearly in Bruges. So we're with cardiologists. This is in, what country is that? Bruges is that funny little country.
In Belgium.
Yeah. And so there's these cardiologists. We were doing some healthcare work, and we had down in a cave. Think of a restaurant down in a cave. It's an evening meeting where all the doctors are together, and the cardiologists are the top of the pyramid.
La crème de la crème.
Crème de la crème. And so the client is totally terrified, and we say, well, we'd gotten to the point where we said, okay, yeah, you should be worried. In your back pocket, have a whole nother plan, have a lecture ready, have a lecturer in the room ready to give a lecture, because it could be the one time when it didn't work. And so I think they literally had that. I don't know if they did or not. And Henri and I are in the front of this big room, and we're drinking wine, and it's a reception, and okay, now we've got to start structuring the liberation. We have to, is it going to work or not? And so even between Henri and I, Henri's going, Keith, you go. And I'm going, Henri, you go. We can't decide who's going to be the first one to possibly fail, because that never stops. Every time you use them, there'll be this, like, is it going to fail thing? And so I stand up, and we're doing impromptu networking. Okay. That just is 99.99999% reliable. But if a Flemish cardiologist, big, tall, imagine something like, like this, but all of them are standing up. I'm interrupting them and saying, I would like you to answer this question. You're invited to answer this question with your one person and then another, basically the setup of impromptu networking. And they kind of look like, well, maybe they aren't going to do it, because, they weren't smiling or like, oh my God, it's another icebreaker is what they were thinking. And we hate that. We don't do that. We are well above that. Well, whatever the question was, it was something at the core of what's challenging in their work. Like, how do you gain confidence in who you refer to when you have to refer a patient out? What makes you confident that the patient will be taken care of? So we were ready. That's really interesting to them. Well, we're down in this cave, and they start in on the impromptu networking. You've never heard a louder, more raucous. People transform from this, looking at you, to the normal explosion of excitement. So that is not I guess that's a barrier to get started. Luckily, liberating structures show their value, get people excited and exchanging ideas immediately. So you see that. That's the first thing you see. And that usually saves the day, if you can get them started.
I would add another thing, which is, I think, a big obstacle. And that is that if you're if you think of an organization, a working kind of environment, in order to use liberating structures, you have to first decide what is it that you're trying to accomplish. You have to be clear on your purpose and your objective, and then you have to sort of ask the question, okay, if that's what we want to do, what's the first step in what we are trying to accomplish, and the second step, what is the objective of the first step? And that objective determines which structure you're going to use. Well, this work about being clear on what you're trying to do and what for and so on, that is not work, as much as it sounds obvious, this is not work that people are used to do and do well. It's very, what people tend to do, what they have the habit of doing is sloppy. We need to get together, we have to make a decision about this, or we have to get everybody on the same page, or we have to share this, or we have to do all this kind of a thing, and you have an agenda that is made with topics that are the subject matter. We're going to discuss communication. Great, well, that's clear,
Henri has been unkind to a few people who've said things like this. Let's just say that. Not unkind, but unrelenting in digging for a purpose. Right, Henri? Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't have that, if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, it's a little bit like, I don't know whether this is going to be a nail, a screw, or a bolt. Well, how are you going to decide which instrument you're going to use? I mean, figure out what it is that you're trying to do here, Do you want to nail something or do you want to screw something? It's not the same thing. And that sort of confusion is very common. I mean, the quality of preparation for meeting and the quality of the agendas is very often a disaster. Okay, not to mention the fact that in addition to that, in a lot of meetings it's not uncommon for somebody in a position of authority to have already decided what he or she wants to accomplish or get at the end. So the notion of letting go of control, this is really scary. That is absolutely frightening. To not know what's going to happen, where you're going, what people are going to say or do, and to get a whole bunch of people to talk to each other and you're not even there to hear what they're going to say. I mean, this is inviting disaster,
It's actually...
Yeah, go ahead, Dorothy. No, go ahead.
This just reminds me of, I've worked a lot in education and kind of changing paradigms of that. And this makes me think of how much in education happens with people in the room haven't even made that decision on the purpose of this, but we're just doing that. So I think that's probably why what you're saying can be so transformative, of even just asking, why is it that we're doing this? And I'm also going to segue us into, I see time is running fast and I have loads of really good questions I'm aching to ask you. So I'm going to just go right off into the next one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt you? Since you say you work in education, my first experience of helping somebody design a course using Liberating Structure started with that question. She was explaining to me what she was doing. And I said, so what's the purpose of this class? What are you trying to accomplish? And there was this big silence. And it was not until we were able to kind of talk around that and clarify and come up with a purpose that she hadn't even thought about. Because there was no purpose before. The purpose was just to teach the class. Here is the program. I'm going to give a lecture on this. So when you start asking, what's the purpose? What do you want for those students? What do you want to accomplish? And once we had arrived at something, then we could start designing. So that I think that's a central issue.
Mm-hmm. And it really transforms everything, coming from like a list of topics to actually an embodied experience of learning. And the next question I have in mind, reading through and thinking through a lot of these things, I think there seems to be a big role of absurdity in LS, in what I see in the designs and in the new lesson development. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on what's the role of absurdity and play in liberating structures, and what does that have to do with complexity science?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's a question that has not been asked in lots of celebrity interviews. Henry, do you have something? I have a few things, but go ahead. I think you have something.
I don't think I caught
Absurdity, the playfulness. What role does absurdity and playfulness have in this work we're doing?
Ah, I love it.
Yeah, see, I knew you'd love it.
Well, the absurdity is a transition that is necessary. You can't get to clarity without going through absurdity. In the same way as, chaos, it's an exaggerated word, it's sort of a necessary transition. You need to be willing to have chaos in order to arrive at order eventually, if you get lucky at the end, so that's a little bit my image of absurdity, that it is, you need it. You need to make space for it. You need to allow it.
But why?
There's two things that let me go for a little bit, Henry, and then you
Sure.
can fix it if you want to. So there's two levels of absurdity. One is perfectly illustrated. The invitation should be absurd in some of the liberating structures. So Triz, let's go to the new ones. There's maybe more playfulness in some of them. But let's take Triz just so the absurdity is, let's design the perfect adverse, the perfect system in which every student is present, but their mind is completely absent. Right? People just laugh out loud when and then it turns out they can do it. And so once you invite that and you do the other level of absurdity, that's productive. Like Triz is wildly productive. So we recognize the degree to which we are involved in our own unwanted outcomes, our own unwanted, we are a barrier to our own success, individually and collectively. So it's absurd to ask that, but it's highly productive, right? So absurdity is always productive for us in the invitation. The second absurd thing is the speed and playfulness of the movement from 1 to 2 people to 4, and then to the whole group. It's like, how could you possibly gain insight or from moving that quickly? And everybody always like, slow, it's too fast. We can't get the logical, well, no, you're not gonna do that. And so the absurdity, we're very playful in the cadence and sequencing, then the speed of the activities. And that turns out to be critically important to generating insight from interaction across all of the people. Right? So once you have that thing going, let's just say the 1, 2, 4 allness, the rapid, a group can handle just about anything, right? Grief, like if you look at the new repertoire, we're talking about how do you work with loss. If you look at tiny monsters, how do you look fear straight in the face? How do you draw out your fear? Literally and collectively draw out your fears. Let's take talking with pixies. How do you recognize when an assumption you hold about the world is no longer true? The myth that you personally are working with an assumption that no longer serves you. Can you reveal that to yourself? That's just absurd that we even say that you can do that. Well, we do that through the microstructure is the patterning of that, the quick iterative sequencing is absurd, and it's wildly productive. And so you have to believe that, you have to have the experience of that multiple times.
But even when you do have that experience, you still have that, the doubt always remains because it is bigger than what we personally experience. Because the thing that we personally experience is only the small group. That's the only thing that we really understand. And the rest is sort of like a bit of a mystery. The things that can happen because you have a large group that is broken up into small groups and how the total thing ends up being so much better. That's, I'll give you another example of absurdity. I was, for 30 years that I worked in an organization from bottom to top, I was always taught, or I was, the rule was that when you're trying to do something, you get the best possible people that are really the expert, the most talented, competent people. You bring them together to figure out what to do, okay? Well, what I discovered with this work was that it's actually useful to have people who know absolutely nothing about what you're working on. That's absurd, but it turns out to be very useful because people who are ignorant of what you're doing will ask completely different questions than nobody would have ever thought about, or will have completely different suggestions that nobody would have ever considered. And so that's an example to me of the kind of thing that I think we learn along the way that are not normal, that are not what people are used to. And I don't know if absurd is the right word, but it is, it is kind of absurd. Yeah.
Well, when people say, it's way too fast. I'm like, yes, it is way too fast. Now you get it. But they're like, they still want to slow it down. So if maybe you've tried to make it longer, you're making it worse. Yeah. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. And so even that's absurd. For me to say that to you and you smile maybe means they were crazy, or it's crazy. It's too fast. We need more time. No, you don't. Yeah.
We're not finished. That's the exclamation regularly. We're not finished. We need more time.
So there's a collective, I don't even know what to call it. We call it collective adaptability or creative adaptability that's accessible through the group and only through the group. And get over yourself. Okay, you are not going to be the source of the font of all wisdom. It's going to come out of the interaction. If there's one thing we did is focus attention on the patterns of interaction and how productive they can be. And it's not about you.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really hard. We're not wired for that. We are wired for it, but our culture has been running around for hundreds and hundreds of years saying, no, it's more about you as an individual. Mm-hmm. It's worse in the US. I mean, I think I admire some of the things that are happening in Finland.
I don't know.
Because maybe you haven't had the same drumbeat of it's all about you. But
I think in general, in the world, there's so much of that individualism. I was thinking that was one of my main insights of the Friday session of the immersion that we had. This kind of thinking with the collective brain versus with our individual ones, and then speaking through that became very apparent to me there.
At the small scale, you have that too. One of my favorite structure is Troika Consulting. And that is also something that doesn't make sense, that you can ask two people that you don't know, that you have never met before, who don't know anything about you. And in the space of a few minutes, you can present to them something that is challenging you, and it will be helpful. It will turn out that they will come up with things that will be helpful in just like 5 minutes or so. That makes no sense. In the way we have been educated and taught to think and solve problems and figure things, this makes no sense. But the reality of it is that it works every single time. And
I agree. It's pretty crazy. It's also one of my favorite ones. Mm-hmm. And it makes me this kind of different way of thinking, or understanding what makes sense and what doesn't reminds me of one. I need to wrap up this part so we can go into the next one, but I do want to ask this last question about hunches, because I hear a lot about working through hunches or read about it in the LS world. So I took a sentence out of, I think, an article that Keith wrote with Fisher, which said, exploring a long, slow hunch over many years and diverse settings. What does that mean? What's the role of hunches in this work of LS?
Well, the big one, we've told some stories about it, is like we can make the complexities science practical. We can translate, we can, let's say, mess around. We can absurdly stir up things and generate more effective, more productive work or life. And so that's the hunch. That the hunch is there's an open door. At the doorstep, there's 30, just over the sill of the door, there's 33 methods, specified simple rules that you can, once you walk through that, you can try them out. And it's also an invitation to invent your own. Once you get that, once you recognize that there's, that you can stir things up and be more effective and more productive with some, I guess one thing that we have, it's hard to do, but there's a set of principles in Liberating Structures that are inspired by some complexity science ideas, and those guide the hunch. So that those guide the hunch generally, this, we want to include and unleash everybody. That's a principle. That's what we believe in, really. And then the microstructures, the liberating structures themselves, and the specified way in which you're interacting, they go one level down to, well, how are you gonna make that happen? What could guide you at the level of a meeting? And yeah.
Sorry, the thing I was gonna say, because I think to me that was a big discovery along the way, and that is that the way you work with liberating structures is you make small steps, and for each step you use a particular structure, and so a lot of the hunches are translated into a step, and the beauty of liberating structure, working with those small steps, is that it doesn't matter if your hunch is wrong, because you have the opportunity after that step to say, this didn't quite come out the way I thought, and we made the wrong assumption or hunch or whatever. So what do we do now? How do we fix this? What should we change about what we were planning to do as the next step, and that kind of thing? And so that's a big difference, because my experience of hunches, I have a big nose, so I really believe in hunches. I go, what are we going to do, kind of thing, okay? But the traditional hunch, if you're wrong, you break your neck. You're wrong. You failed. You made a mistake. It's not going to work. Bingo. You lost it, okay? Whereas hunches with liberating structures are mostly, if not always, recoverable, because they are small hunches with small structures, small steps along the way, okay? And so it becomes a natural way to work, because when you are designing how you're going to approach something, you are actually guessing. You're assuming that this, you're assuming certain outcomes and certain objectives, that they're going to correct one. Well, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. So that I think is a big difference, that there is, hunches are welcome if you want, when you work with liberation, because that's how you actually take some chances and go a little bit beyond what you would otherwise, kind of say, okay, let's give it a shot and see what happens, kind of a thing.
Thank you. Well, I think it's time now to open up the field for questions from others.
Yes, Thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I've been laughing here many times and get some new insights. So thank you for sharing. I think now we're very few, so we could take a minute to think by ourselves what question remains now, and then bombard the chat with our questions. And then maybe we can select a few to explore a little bit.
It's nice to do this together, Keith. It's fun.
You just had a good insight. I like that was a new one for me. The hunch in the micro hunch really blew my mind. And we're messing up your 1 minute, so I'm gonna try to shut up, Henry.
Yeah, if you have questions that you are now left with, you can also put them in the chat and think about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a question. Could you come and run the United States, maybe?
So there's a question: how has your work with LS evolved your perspective on life?
I want to go first there. I knew totally more confidence in people. It wasn't that I didn't have it before, but now I kind of think we can handle anything together, anything. And when people say, no, we can't talk about that, or that's too dangerous, or it won't work. There was some guy who wanted to do, it didn't happen, but truth and reconciliation across political parties in the United States. I was like, okay, yeah, we can do that. You know, and it seems it's just crazy. I'm not sure. Actually, that one pushed me a little too far, but I am so supremely more confident in people together to accomplish things. And my wife, you saw Rita right behind Henry. Does not have as much confidence in people to handle the hard things, because it's easy to see. We're dystopic. We're really good at seeing dystopia, where we can see everything that's going to go wrong, and our whole minds are. And I am not Henry. I can see the dark side, but I don't think it has a chance against the capabilities that we're developing. So Liberating Structures has made my life, if I was an optimist before, I'm whatever 2 levels above that now. It's like, yeah, we can do that. There's no thing that we can't do.
Yeah, the thing that is, for me, the big discovery, which was, and it's connected to what Keith is talking about, is that before Liberating Structure, which is really my professional life, because Liberating Structure came after I retired, everything was about building organization by finding good people, competent people, and then training them and that kind of thing and so forth. So everything was about quote unquote good, competent, qualified people and that kind of thing. Okay? And what Liberating Structures has shown me, that the discovery is that you can include everybody. You don't have to be selective. That there is a place for everybody to contribute. That you're not dependent on individual as much as you are dependent on how you get them to interact with each other. And that's the big difference. That this is the key to being able to accomplish things. And that's because what I remember when I was working was very much this focus on individual, and then you have to develop people, you have to train, you have to make the people more competent, more qualified, more this, and it's endless, it's hopeless. All right. And here, what we're saying, you take people as they are, and you now have to figure out which structure you're going to use in order to get them to interact together productively and make space for everybody. Well, that's a totally different formula. So that's exciting because it makes all kinds of things. It opens up all kinds of possibility, and yes, it makes one more optimistic. At the same time, the difficulty in getting those kind of things adopted, and how much is pushing in the opposite direction of that, is depressing. I mean, control and power is still, dominating the landscape.
I like Nora's question. Is there a message we have for people who haven't discovered it yet? Is that the right way?
Yeah,
Just
nice.
entering.
What's the message you'd like to share with a person who's just entering the wide world of LS?
One that I've been saying lately is just don't believe it. Don't believe it. That you bring all your cynicism to it, but to try it anyway. What's the harm in trying it? You're not going to hurt it. You might look slightly foolish momentarily. If you have a small place to try it. Don't believe it. Prove it to yourself. Try to notice some things. Are people more engaged? Do they make a loose connection with someone that could be that they follow up on? Did a new option pop into view? And ask them to critique it. Did a new option pop, some novel opportunity or option pop into view? And did you come a step closer to a first step or an action? Some sort of, did the context for taking action become clear? Or do you have it? And if any or all three of those things happened, that's a miracle. Maybe you should believe it. Maybe you should believe it. So bring your rigorous critical mind to something that's messy, illogical, and awesome cool, right? Why not? What do you got something to lose? Look how screwed up the way we work together, the way we are together is pretty messed up. So it's worth, give it at least as much attention as all of the other things that are out there. Which mostly, in my view, is we're treating a bunch of symptoms. When I look at my own practice and the number of things that that I learned as an OD practitioner, that I learned as a sophisticated, privileged change manager, whatever you want, facilitator, leader, whatever you want to call that. Almost all of those things are responses to symptoms of not including people. So the way I was trained as a facilitator, almost all of it is absolutely obsolete. Most of the leadership training as a top potential person that I learned, absolutely useless, obsolete. There's so many things that we're teaching people in school, in business schools, in any kind of school. It's so bad. It's so counterproductive. It isn't completely bad, but it's only a small part of what you could focus on. So what do you got to lose? Bring your rigorous critical mind to trying it out. That's my message.
I don't know what my message is. I think that what I like to do is, if it is possible, is to invite people to offer something for discussion, that some challenge, some problem they are trying to deal with, or something that is bothering them, and then try to cook up something that uses liberating structure that could be helpful. And try to find the easiest possible way for them to get a first experience, because that's really, in the end, that first experience is the only way that they're going to be able to move forward. You have to do something. You have to make a step, and it's not an intellectual exercise. It is, you actually have to do something, and doing something involves taking some risk of some sort, because you're doing something different that you're not familiar with, and And so if I get the opportunity, I try to help people figure something like that out that is easy enough for them to give it a shot. But it's I don't have a formula. I don't think, I think it's a totally unpredictable process because it's very personal. And, some people jump on the sort of, they just can't wait, and others are sort of, so.
There are a couple of really good questions in chat. I don't know how much time we have.
Oh, I have, where are we?
Oh, we're just working through some questions that are all really good that it turns out, Henry, you and I are not actually going to answer them. It's like the other people who are using liberating structures are going to answer them, but we have opinions. I want to answer the thing about situation that required a new liberating structure. Well, the pandemic. Let's take the pandemic. All the liberating structures need to be translated to a virtual platform, so everything, little shifts, I'd say 98% are easily transferable to Zoom, anything, where you can do 1, 2, 4 all. So Zoom, and some of the others are clumsy as hell, but you can still make it work. So that required sort of a lot of creative thinking on part of the community, and they did it within about 3 weeks on LS Slack. There were like people running workshops and doing nutsy things. Solid 2-day workshop in Berlin, immersion workshop, nuts. So that's one thing, but two things that come out of this situation. One is I've been putting a lot of attention, Henry, you don't know this, but I've been running prototyping grief walking. So there's so many people that have lost something as a result of the pandemic. Big things, small things, all kinds of things. And so even some of my clients now, I have one client that's simultaneously working in residential care, 50 facilities across the South. So they have, all their meetings are begun with how many people are tested positive, negative, how many people have died on the staff, and how many people have died who are residents, who are customers of our business. And every time I'm with them, I'm like, oh my God, can I continue? That's the beginning of the meeting. Can we continue? And so what that called out for them to continue to move forward was figure out a business model. They're also working on racial equity simultaneously, and their business is deeply threatened by the pandemic because nobody wants to send their parents to the residential care anymore, or they're worried about it. So what that called out for was a whole bunch of things to face up to something really hard, like what the pandemic is doing to people. And so the combination of liberating structures were things like wicked questions, critical uncertainties, fishbowl, and really importantly, grief walking. How do you work with the loss? How do you tap into social support when you have regular losses? And I'm talking about big losses in this case. So I've been putting some effort into how can you do something, tap into social support in Zoom for talking about losses. And we've had some really pretty amazing success with it. So that's an example of where we invented one after the book was published because Fisher and I were working on it together. We did it face-to-face. I prototyped a bunch of times during workshops face-to-face, and it was pretty effective. And then all of a sudden the pandemic, and it's like, well, can we do something that tender, that difficult in Zoom? And so far, there's more people testing it out there, but it looks really good. You know, it looks really just heartwarming. I'm not going to tell you all the stories, but it looks pretty good. And it's also pretty easy to include more people. And during the pandemic, because of the digital platform, you can just kind of, everybody, really literally everybody can be, well, there's 50 breakout rooms in Zoom and only so many people that can work on a Google Doc at the same time, but those are pretty big limits. So that's a description of the ongoing design process. There's some people that are just design a liberating structure every day, seemingly, or something. And sifting and sorting how they work is a big challenge for us. We do that in Slack a little bit. It's kind of messy, the development process, but it's great fun. It's my favorite thing to do, is work on new structures. Sorry, I rambled.
Yeah, the thing that I feel, and I'm not sure what can be done about that, but the place where I feel there is a need for the most improvement in terms of what people do is the design, what I would call the design phase of approaching anything, you know, of figuring out what are we trying to do here, what our objectives are, what are the steps, and therefore what structures are we going to use, you know. I mean, that work is challenging for, under the best of circumstances, for anybody. I mean, you know, it's not like, I think, you know, we may look like expert, Keith and I, but if you put us in a situation where we are participating and figuring out what to do about something, we will struggle too, figuring out. And the interesting thing, of course, is that when you do that, you also discover that there is not a single answer. So if you have half a dozen people, you know, separately coming up with a design for some project or something like that, you're going to have half a different, you know, you're going to have 6 different strings. And some of them very different, totally different. Yeah. So that work, I think there is lots of learning that anybody can develop. You know, their ability and their ability to do that properly. You know, together with a group of people, because it's not an individual exercise either. Yeah. So. You know, I think that if you think that even with just what is in the book that you have 33 structure, I mean, you got plenty to work with for anything. So,
Thank you. And I see some answers already for Natalia regarding a favorite LS string for groups with polarized opinions. Thanks for that, Keith.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a string, but some combination of those things all are good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We can just read them out loud for the recording. So there's Wicked Questions, Conversation Cafe, Troika, What I Need from You, so Winfy, and the What Cube, and yeah, that was a few good suggestions. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie.
It's a good idea not to have preferences.
Everybody's got their favorite though, and then they over rely on it until it doesn't work. Multiple times.
You have to be open-minded.
Does it work for all the purposes?
One of the most interesting things for me is to learn a bunch of new ones, Henry. I don't think you've put yourself into this thing, but when somebody else designs a liberating structure and then I've got to learn it, it's like all the same challenges come up that all the people who didn't write a book about it experience. You know, it's like, oh yeah, it is. It makes you really nervous to try one the first time. It's like, well, what was this? You know, what was the step? What do you do first, second, and third? And it's like my empathy for the novice is reignited because I am the novice.
Lovely, thank you.
time to wrap up, maybe.
Yeah. Should we still do the little experiment for closing? Yes. Okay. So I've thought that maybe we could close with a little something, maybe it's similar to Matt T. So I have 4 open sentences that I would like each of you to answer very quickly in the Matt T, but in the online Matt T, but verbally. So like you just rapid fire, tell me one sentence, and we go on to each one of you, and we go on to the next, just to see how it works. Because yeah, I thought it could be fun. So I'm taking this also out of one of the 10 by 10 Matt T prompts that maybe you guys have written, or Fisher, or just from that world. Inspired by David Bryan and the Tom Tom Club.
Oh, that's Fisher.
Okay, so we're gonna do
David Byrne. David Byrne, he's a musician.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. In this wild, wild life, we are
never alone.
Infinitely capable.
Napping.
Floating.
Great stuff. When I stay up late, I am thinking about
the US election.
The US election, yeah.
My dream home in wooden Käpylä.
I stay up late all the time, so I'm thinking about anything and everything that you could think of.
Sounds great. I've been thinking about the LS immersion. We're hosting right now.
That too.
That too. A house that needs burning down is
fascination with top talent.
Expertise.
Ivory Towers.
First thing that came to my mind was White House.
Good thing you're not an American citizen.
Yeah. That wasn't bad.
I would disagree there. You should not confuse the structure with the participants.
Yes.
The structure is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Don't blame the structure. It's like when people use liberating structure and they say, it didn't work. What do you mean it didn't work? This is like taking a hammer and hitting your finger and say, it didn't work.
Great
Something
metaphor.
is wrong with this hammer.
Don't blame the hammer.
Great stuff. So take me to the river called, it's not just about hearing, but also about making sense.
Yeah. It's a song, Henry. He's a songwriter and a great one. So I've got the song in my head. So I'm.
Yeah, I do not know. I think cold is misspelled. It's COLD, and I'm not going to the river.
Okay, take me to the river called Catnip Fluff.
Only if there is a sauna first.
I want to go to the Kemijoki River in Lapland, but it is very cold as well. But that's where I want to go.
Take me to the river called Endlessness.
Lovely. And one last one. Liberating structures are only good for
things that matter.
They are only good for everything.
Inner children.
Well, thanks for playing that little game with me. I've seen these prompts and been like, what is it? What is it? So I just wanted to try them out with you. Thank you so much.
He's a great guy. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're thinking about.
Love you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Real
Bye.
pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.